Hey guys, and welcome to the video where I am going to be grading the AFC West draft classes. We're going to be starting off with obviously the Broncos here. Sorry, I kind of scrolled over the Broncos, going to the Raiders, Chargers, and then the Chiefs. And I've had some time to think over these. I'm going to try to kind of rattle these off of what I think and the bottom line of what I think, after having been able to kind of review it a bit. But starting off with the Broncos, we all know they drafted Jahdae Barron, the slot corner that, a lot of people, definitely said looked very, very good. A lot of people were very high on him. He seems to me like he's definitely one of those guys that it's like is kind of an Energizer Bunny type of slot, which obviously you want. You want this guy to be able to track players. You want him to be able to get around blocks, to assist in the running game. I don't see what people say about his size. I mean, he's 5'11", just shy of 200 pounds. And don't get me wrong, I'd like to have him a little bit more weight on him and stuff like that. But like some of the, I think of my team, the Packers and Jerry Alexander, he's only like 5'11", and I don't even think like 200. And obviously he's had injury concerns and that sort of thing. But when he plays, he's still a very sound tackler, scrappy tackler. And it's like, gets the job done, one way or another. I think Jahdae Barron going to the Broncos to improve their secondary is a huge thing, because I don't think this wasn't a team that needed to improve their pass rush. I think, he's going to be able to learn a lot from Patrick Surtain, and I think that they could boast, potentially one of the best secondaries in the league on an already elite defense. So I do not mind adding to your strength in the first round. It definitely happens, and we see it pan out to where it's like, oh, if these teams can't move the ball or score more than, like one touchdown and a couple field goals a game, it makes it very easy on, the offense. And a young quarterback, Bo Nix, who played very well last year, but definitely needed some help to take the next step. I think that getting a really good defense will help him to do so by getting him on the field more and getting the opposing offense on the field more. I'm giving this an A grade. I think it's a good pick for the Broncos. RJ Harvey seemed like a bit of a reach, but with the way that this guy is electric and the fact that he's going to a Sean Payton offense, I think that he's going to a perfect fit. I think he's going to be used. They say Joker, Joker here at the bottom type of thing. Obviously, that's kind of just like a mismatch, like, scheme kind of role type of thing. We all know that Bucky Irving drafted last year, really, really panned out and was like a 5th round pick. RJ Harvey to me just screams like, oh, this guy could be a Darren Sproles for Sean Payton, and he did very, very well under Sean Payton for however many years in New Orleans. So, looking at this guy, I think he's going to get a lot of chances. I think he's going to do a lot of good for this team. And he's going to provide a safety valve for Bo Nix that he didn't have last year, who's going to be able to produce and do electric things. I'm giving this an A grade as their top need, and a guy that, like, I think will fit their system very, very nicely. Pat Bryant out of Illinois. So Pat Bryant, obviously a wide receiver with some height, a little bit leaner type of thing, and that sort of thing, but receiving yards per game, pretty good production and that sort of thing. He looks like a dude, for whatever reason, that like didn't test well at the combine, but it's like we've seen some of these guys that play under Sean Payton, and it's like even if they're a little bit slower, they just got to have sure hands and that sort of thing. And, this guy could definitely learn for Cortland Sutton. If he's a good vertical threat type of thing, it's like, I mean, Bo Nix obviously, can seam it through some tight windows and that sort of thing. I think Pat Bryant was a good pick. He'll probably look better. I mean, sometimes these guys just don't test well. And it's like, I don't think you have the 3rd receiving yards per game if like maybe your game isn't a little bit better, a little bit more polished. And it's kind of one of those, like, it looks like a head scratcher, but trust Sean Payton as he knows wide receivers and he knows how to run an offense. And I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt on this. I am giving them a B plus on this because it's definitely a position of need that they needed to address to bring more guys into that locker room besides Sutton and Mims. Savion Jones, edge. I do not mind this at all. This guy's obviously a little bit bigger of a guy, to put on the edge and that sort of thing. I think, like I said earlier, it's important to add to your strong units to like make teams wonder, like, how are they going to use this guy? Plug him in a certain scenario, teach him something that's going to make him unique or something like that. And teams are going to, maybe scratch their heads at why they put this guy into the game. You've always got to be adaptive on defense and that sort of thing, in order to be good year to year. So I'm going to say, that for this pick, just because it wasn't a need and that sort of thing, and I'm really kind of unsure, I'm giving it a B minus. I just think that they didn't really need edge here, and they could have bolstered on some of their other needs. But obviously this guy looks like he could play interior with his size as more of like a pass rush sort of option, as a DT, as an interior, but we'll see, obviously. Quay Robinson, another edge, a guy who's a bit more smaller in size. I don't think that that's, a problem. This one I'm also kind of skeptical on, though, and I'm going to give him, a C plus on this, just because I think that there's no way that you're putting this guy interior, like Quay Robinson would, and it's one of those that's like, we'll wait and see, but I'm skeptical of it for sure. Jeremy Crawshaw, punter. You obviously need a punter. That thing out of Australia. I feel like these guys coming out of Australia are just something different. They always have huge legs for whatever reason and that sort of thing. 45.8, that's, solid and that sort of thing. Career high in punts, 25 punts inside the 20-yard line, and he kicked off twice. That's not really, a thing to highlight about. Obviously, they needed a punter. This guy looks like he's got the talent and he's got the leg and the placement. I'm gonna give it an A minus grade, with the only knock that I'm like, maybe you could have found another punter or not had to have to draft a punter or something like that. But this guy looks like he was the best punter, I guess. And, I think the foreign, kickers and punters and that sort of thing always seem to pan out. And then we got Caleb Lohner, 6'7", 250. Goodness, this is, obviously even tall for a tight end. This gives me the Jimmy Graham vibes, just because of like Sean Payton, having Jimmy Graham at one point, and Jimmy Graham was like 6'7", 6'8", type of thing. I don't know if Caleb Lohner is going to be quite like what we saw Jimmy Graham do, but if he is, that's going to be huge for this football team. They obviously brought in the guy from the Jaguars, that was Evan Ingram from the Jaguars and that sort of thing. So maybe this guy doesn't have to start right away, but I do like the pick. And so, matchup problem in the end zone, that's a very good thing. If you've got a guy like Sutton that can jump ball forward, if you got a guy like even, Pat Bryant, if he molds out, you got three guys that can jump ball for it, and you pick your favorite matchup as Bo Nix, which I know he will, because he's a pretty smart quarterback, with where he throws it. Even as a rookie last year. I think this is, kind of a solid, pickup that could, prove really good. I'm going to give it a minus, just because I don't think this guy is going to be starting unless he crazily impresses at training camp and beats out Evan Ingram for like the starting job. But it sounds like he looks like the kind of guy with a mold that it's like, oh, this guy could potentially be a steal in the 7th round. But overall, my grade for this team, just because there's a couple that I'm really unsure of. The punter, I guess, is fine if they don't have a punter. Clearly this guy led, in kick punts inside the 20, which is important, especially when you have an offense that, like, they added good pieces, but, until they play together and they put it together, like, it's important to have a punter as, security, So I'm gonna give the Broncos a solid A minus. Only a couple of things here, but otherwise I really like who they picked, and I trust, that they're gonna get the most out of these offensive guys, and that their defense, at least with Jahdae Barron and Savion Jones, will be better. Moving on, we have the Raiders next. Austin Ginty, I don't think this really needs to be talked about too much, obviously. I don't think it was a pick that, to me, I don't think it was a pick to me where it was actually a reach. People that are saying that, like, oh, they should have definitely went O-line type of thing. Like, Gene T should have been one of those that it's like, oh, he should go to another team with a more proven O-line. I think that he is going to be better. He's going to make them better for it. The fact that he's compared to Alvin Kamara, I guess, here tells me that it's like, in watching the tape, he's elusive, he steps, he just is a never quit type of guy that's shifty, has good speed, and just, that's what you want in today's NFL. Those guys just like work and work and work and work until they have a break type of thing. And I mean, obviously looking at the overall whole of their thing, I do like the tackles that they drafted, the linemen that they drafted later. Jack Beck in the second round, I do think there was other options available, but I honestly do think that, like, with the receivers that they have, I honestly think that Jack Beck was kind of something that they needed, since Devontae Adams obviously was traded away and they moved on from him. I think Jack Beck, while he's not going to be Devontae Adams obviously right away, if he is, I mean, that's a steal of a pick, in the late second round. I think that this guy, will fit in perfect, play with a lot of hearts, and be able to have contested catches for Geno Smith as a stronger guy, just with a bigger frame. And I know that some people talked about this guy possibly moving to even like tight end, which I thought was kind of weird, but I think Jack Beck will fit in nicely, and I think that he'll be an instant producer. I'm going to give this an A grade. Darian Porter, I really love this. We all know that the Legion of Boom was under Pete Carroll, and then we get this guy who's 6'3", 195, eerily similar to Richard Sherman, but clearly has, better speed than Sherman did. Don't get me wrong, Sherman, with his length and his intelligence, was able to track, players downfield and disrupt and, lock them down for quite some time. But like Darian Porter, to me, just looks like a guy that it's like is going to, start and come in and be very, very good. And the fact that he fell to the third round is kind of wild to me. I think this is a steal of a pick. I'm giving it an A grade. Caleb Rogers, first of 2 tackles in a row, back-to-back picks. Caleb Rogers, obviously, they say that he's going to like play guard and that sort of thing. But he also, has good enough mobility to like push up to the second level and that sort of thing. I'm not sure exactly how the Raiders offense is going to look this year. I do think that they're going to try and take the pressure off of Geno Smith quite a bit, because that was one of the issues that, and I'm sure Pete Carroll knows it with Seattle, is that Geno Smith was having to do a lot of like, throwing it downfield quite a lot. And while he's not bad at it, I think it just added a lot of pressure and made their team kind of one-dimensional with how lackluster the Seattle running game was, the last couple of years. And obviously last year with McDonald, and then the year before that with Carroll, it's just like the offense has never really figured out its identity in Seattle. And I think that, they draft this guy to possibly put at guard, which obviously was a need. I find it funny they don't have tackle up here, to be honest with you. But, then we move on to Charles Grant. Now, this guy looks like he could definitely be, he could be one of those picks where it's like he's playing tackle, obviously, but he's very versatile and that sort of thing, and can move around and can play either tackle spot. So, this guy looks like he's going to be able to protect Geno, be a very good player for them. And, I think that it was, just a huge statement that you drafted 2 tackles literally in back-to-back picks. And I think that they executed this very nice. I'm giving this an A grade. Moving on to Dante Thorne Jr. Here, I think, is another guy who could be, definitely a huge difference maker. This is going to be their downfield guy, but they can also use him in other ways because he had a very good 3-cone as well at 1.54 or whatever it was. But Dante Thorne Jr. didn't have a crazy vertical or anything like that. But a guy like this, with the length that he has, the speed that he has as a 4.33 40, he, could very well be a big steal here. Obviously didn't have the craziest of production or anything like that. Very average. But it's like this guy looks like he could definitely be kind of a game changer for an offense that needs a game changer. And it's like you have Jack Beck, who looks to me like he can be some short yard running, getting short yard gains underneath type of thing. Then you've got Dante Thorne that like could be your medium to deep or even short play threat. But I feel like they're going to use a medium to deep more often than not. I'm also giving this an A grade. I think this is a solid pick in the 4th round for a team that desperately needs a little bit more wide receiver depth and then a little bit more competition. Tonka Hemingway, I really, really like this. I think, anytime you add to a strength is important on defense. You obviously have Max Crosby, but you look at Tonka Hemingway and he's a clear pass rush type of guy. Would need to add some more weight, in my opinion, to be in every down, unless he's just a freak, like an Aaron Donald, but that's not something to bank on, at his weight and height. But he's definitely one of those guys that, he looks like he could be a huge steal here and, could come in on longer passing down situations and be a disruptor. I'm giving this a B+ just because I think that, even though they say that he can really do, hold his ground in one-on-one defending the run, it's just one of those that he's only going to be able to be one-on-one, and it's like could easily be removed from a play with a double team if there's not a bigger guy on the line. JJ Pex, I really like this one as well. More of your prototypical size and that sort of thing. And this guy, to me, was kind of an interesting talent. Obviously, we had the best position was D tackle in this draft. I've just preached it, with how many guys it's like in the later rounds could be versatile. This guy did some ridiculous things and he played, as a running back, clearly has quick feet, which just sounds like he could be a disruptor. It's kind of interesting because they draft Tonka Hemingway 2 rounds earlier. And then they must have been like, well, Pax is still on here, who looks like he could be a beast, type of thing. I'm giving this an A grade. It would not surprise me if JJ Pex was actually the guy who's the starter and they subbed in Hemingway with how freakish Pex looks, and whatever else. Tommy Mellott, this was an interesting guy who played QB, but as well as, wide receiver, and they list him as a wide receiver, but on his RAS they list him as a QB, which is interesting. He is a little bit under 6 feet tall, actually, but this guy is an interesting pick. Like, what are they going to use him for is what I wonder. He looks like the kind of guy that it's like you would plug in for specific scenarios, like a gadget sort of dude. But it's like, and I guess you could maybe run some sort of a wildcat or interesting thing, but Tommy Mellott is an intriguing one. I'm going to give it a higher grade just because I love these unique players to the heck, and it's like it gives the chance for these offensive graders to be like, how do we get these guys involved, type of thing. So I will give it a B+ just because like Tommy Mellott might not see a lot of playing time, but anytime you added like a unique player with a unique skill set and did a lot of interesting things, I just have a hard time knocking it because I think with the right mind, the player can work, type of thing. And then we move on to an actual listed QB, Cam Miller. I feel like this is just for depth purposes and that sort of thing. Maybe they don't trust Aiden O'Connell, which I don't blame them. He was missing wide open guys over the middle of the field. It's like, in some of the games last year when I'm like, what in the world hit that guy? The game that I really think about was against Kansas City where they could have beat them and they had that end of the game like muff where it's like then they ended up losing, not be able to kick the field goal which could have done, a lot to change like the playoff seeding and whatever else. But it's like, so maybe they just want backup competition. That is how I see Cam Miller, because he's gonna be 24 by the time the season starts. So it's like, this isn't a guy that you pick and you sit for like 2 years. If Geno was going to retire after this year, it would be just kind of strange to me, still, if they were like, yeah, Cam Miller's our guy and whatever else. So it's like, I do agree with QB competition through being the backup. I never think it's a good idea to have starting QB competition type of thing like the Titans are doing. So Cam Miller, I'm going to give a B, just because, like, if you have a situation where Geno's hurt and you need a backup to come in, you do want to be sure you're good with the guy that you're sending in. Cody Lindenberg, out of Minnesota, linebacker. Interesting, very average size. You'd like these guys to be like, to me, like 240 to maybe 250. Sounds like a dude who's a very sure tackler. And I know that Pete Carroll knows the value of like special teams, like every great coach does, and I mean, I'm sure every team knows it, but like, getting a guy like this who looks like a sure-handed tackler and is I guess a good special team size, kudos to that. I don't know what the Raiders' special teams was last year. They were obviously on the, doing punts a lot, so you need guys like Lindenberg. I'm going to give this pick a B, just because, like, maybe he competes for starting snaps as a 7th-round pick, but who knows? Maybe they see sign in him. But overall, for the draft of the Raiders, I really did like this draft for them. I think they got a lot of guys that can, be very good. I'm going to give them also a solid A- grade, just because I think maybe you could have went elsewhere with the backup situation, is what I'm assuming this is. And then, maybe you didn't have to go Tonka Hemingway. You already have a pretty good pass rush. Even though I like that you bolster that kind of aspect of your team, and that can really help a defense. Moving on, we have the Chargers next. So I didn't like the Omarion Hampton pick at first, but here's the reason why it's kind of brought my attention and made me actually approve of it. So we obviously have seen kind of a running back resurgence, like primarily last year, even though it's like it's always been important to have a running game as a top team. It just doesn't get talked about as much how the running game should get talked about. And I guess, the running backs getting paid less kind of has overshadowed, like, the rest of like what they mean to a team. Teams know that they need a good running back or a good running back tandem. So here's what I'm thinking with the Chargers. I think because Harbaugh likes to run the football so much, I think he's honestly trying to emulate a little bit of what the Lions have been doing. So Hampton obviously is bigger, but he's fast and he's strong and he's very, very, very good. The bona fide number 2 of this draft. Like, don't get me wrong, there was a lot of good backs, but he was definitely the bona fide number 2 with the closest to Gene T, and he's a very good player. Like Gene T, close to a unicorn style. You have Hampton, who's going to be who could be a great running back. So I think that they brought in Najee Harris, and then they were like, Omarion Hampton is here. Let's get 2 running backs, even though Najee Harris hasn't really had injury in history, so that we can have an alternate running game and control games and help Herbert that way through this, because they all know that last year when their primary running back went out, it was a lot tougher on Herbert because they just didn't have the production. Now this year, they don't really have to worry about that type of thing. I'm giving them the Marion Hampton pick an A, even though to me, like, yeah, they say it's a need here. I don't think it was a crazy need. I think that some people probably wish they went, wide receiver or something, even though they drafted a very good wide receiver next. Trey Harris, I think, is exactly what they kind of needed. I think Trey Harris is going to come in and he's going to be able to serve a role, and he's going to help take some of the pressure off McConkey. The lad we all love, is going to be able to work his game while not being the only focus, for defense, because we all know Quinn Johnston wasn't drawing focus on him last year. Trey Harris can come in, be solid, and do things really well for this team. I'm giving this also an A, because him dropping down to 23 here, kind of wild to me, especially with who is it that the Texans drafted? The God, I can't remember his name. Early in the round, I think that Trey Harris could have went to so many other teams between there and then, but it's a very solid pick, an A grade for this. Jamari Caldwell. I know that the interior of the O-line was kind of an issue, and that edge was also somewhat of an issue, even though they don't list it as a need here, which is kind of shocking. I think Jamari Caldwell obviously fits a nose tackle profile at 332 and that sort of thing. So it's going to make a defense, very, very good. You're going to have to run it outside type of thing, as, this team just very, very much, they didn't give much up in the past. So you got to be able to squeeze out of the run. Jamari Caldwell is going to help with that. It was definitely a need. So I'm going to give this also an A grade with a guy I think will be solid and will be able to fill that role. Kyle Kennard, edge. So, they did draft edge. I would have liked for someone that was a little bit better. Obviously, Kennard has long arms and that sort of thing. So I just don't think Kyle Kennard had, I guess, the production. It wasn't really a reach, but I guess... Harbaugh, it's interesting. Harbaugh, I guess, knows his players, and he probably played, saw Kennard in college, that sort of thing. So it's interesting, get off blocks late. So he just doesn't look like kind of a home run pass rush steal is the only problem that I have for it, and that sort of thing. He may pan out and he might be really good for a 4th round pick, but it's I don't know. There were some other guys around the 4th round that I liked better, for them, but who knows? 34-inch arm length is obviously crazy. Some people really like measurables. I think, the heart of a player, obviously, and where their head is at is, something to me that's more important. So he could work out, but it's that's kind of my knock on him. I'm giving this a B grade just because I guess of my own personal feelings on it. Keandre Lambert-Smith, another wide receiver, a guy who very much looks like, kind of wild. It's I was talking about the Lions earlier. This guy kind of looks like, another version of Jameson Williams on their team. It was a 6'1", and he's a Blazer 1'9". And it's didn't quite run, obviously, as fast as Williams did, but 4.37 is still, you don't want to get burned by this guy. So it's they're going to be able to use Trey Harris and have him run routes and do whatever they want. Lambert-Smith, potentially could be, a huge steal. And we all know that Herbert, accurate football, and will place it, where it needs to go. Keandre Lambert-Smith looks like he could be a great pick. We'll see if he gets a lot of playing time. Obviously, he's got to probably beat out Quinn Johnston, to be honest with you, unless they're really trying to revamp their starting 3 besides McConkey, obviously. But Keandre Lambert-Smith, this guy could be a sneaky good pick. I'm going to give this a minus. Just because I think he will have to compete for snaps. Oronde Gadsden, the second tight end. I think it was important that they get a tight end. I think that this guy obviously has crazy length, undersized, so he is more of just a receiving threat. It was one thing that I was saying with the Chargers that I'm they need to either go for a tight end in free agency or they need to draft a pass catcher tight end because they just don't have one. I love this pick. It was a need. I'm giving this an A grade as well. Branson Taylor, a tackle, never bad at depth. Obviously, one of the better tackle tandems in the league with Slater, and then God, why can't I remember the rookie's name last year? You guys know who I'm talking about. I'm not sure why I forgot his name, to be honest with you. Never bad to have depth and that sort of thing. You know, he also is 6'6", 321. Combo blocker. This guy looks like he could maybe even start at guard for them. Left guard more than likely. We'll see what kind of happens. But I like the pick. I'm going to give it a B+. RJ Mickens, safety. Obviously, you know, this is a team that already has Derwin James. You know, that's arguably one of the best safeties in the league. You know, could make some arguments to say he's the top in the league when he's healthy and that sort of thing. I don't know much about Mickens, to be honest with you. I think that the safety class was very good for this draft, to be honest with you. And he obviously played for, you know, a big school and that sort of thing and was listed 8th. So I don't mind it. Long arms type of thing makes it hard to throw deep against these guys, which, you know, that Harbaugh with a stout running game that's going to drain the clock, they're just going to try and, you know, not blow coverage, you know, against teams that are trying to play catch up. I think this is a good pick. I'm going to give it a B+. Triquez Bridges, sorry if I butchered the name, out of Florida. So Oregon for 5 seasons and Florida for 1. So clearly this guy is a bit older and that sort of thing. Tall with long arms and very good speed. We obviously don't have his, let me look at his measurables here. 6'2", 200. I like it when you get these safeties that are like 6'2" and taller. I think sometimes you get some of these teams that it's like that all they go for is like these 6 foot tall guys. Get a Kyle Hampton, get a guy who's taller, you know, and, you know, can really just cover deep and is going to make these QBs second guess throwing, you know, to these guys. It's kind of interesting that they obviously drafted 2 safeties. Obviously, though, you know, like I said with Derwin James, he was healthy last year, but imagine if he gets injured this year. You want some security there, so I understand it. And it's not like, to me, the Chargers had a lot of holes. Like, you look at their team, and it's like last year they were kind of ready to compete. They were like a running back short, you know, out of healthiness and that sort of thing, and then a couple of wide receivers, and they could have been, you know, a very dangerous team last year that's going to be dangerous this year and compete for this division. So I'm going to give them a B+ just because I do think, you know, a couple of their picks are kind of like, but I think overall they very solid picks. Moving on to the Chiefs. I think Josh Simmons was a home run hit. They needed linemen. Josh Simmons with the upside and that sort of thing. And the fact that, like, when he was healthy, he was looking like the best and only injuries derailed him. I'm giving this an easy A, you know, especially since they traded down a little bit for it. Omar Norman Lott, I like this pick as well. He's not a typical, like, every down. He's a pass rush kind of guy. The Chiefs really do like getting pressure up the middle, and they move Chris Jones around a lot that, like, Norman Lott could learn from him and, you know, that sort of thing. I think this is going to be a solid pick. Obviously, Spags, you know, probably had to sign off on this, on whether he liked this guy. And he gets a lot out of these, you know, linemen, and they do their job usually pretty well. You know, in terms of like defensive longevity, I'd say that Spags has it on lock in the league, to be honest. So I trust it. And I think, you know, they definitely need a D tackle with players aging and that sort of thing. I'm going to give this an A- just because I think that this guy's going to be more of a dude for pass rush situations than run defense, being a little undersized. Ashton Gillott, I love this pick. I was actually kind of disappointed because I wanted my Packers to get this guy as potentially one of their guys, you know, and that sort of thing. So I think it's, you know, a very good pick for this team, that it's like, you know, they have a good pass rush, but they could use, you know, another guy. Like, it's like Chris Jones and I can't remember is it Leo? Is it Leo Chenal? I'm trying to remember the other guy. God, we are in the off season, you guys, where I'm like forgetting names, even though I can picture the guy's name in my head. But Jalot, I like this a lot. The guy is strong. He does very good. He had a lot of production. I think, out of Louisville, and I'll be honest, Louisville's got kind of a sweet spot for me. So I'm going to give this an A grade. I think it was a good pick, right where, honestly, he probably should go, even though I think that some people had him in the 4th round. Noel Williams, a cornerback. I don't think it's a bad idea. I think that we all know McDuffie is their man, but McDuffie also played where he wasn't the best last year, even though he was still good. So it's like Noel Williams is going to be an outside guy and that sort of thing. I think that he's going to fill, that outside role and that sort of thing. And I think that, Spags does a very good job of coaching up his DBs. That's why they were willing to let go of Snead. They obviously didn't have like a crazy good replacement last year. And I think they were trying to not trade Snead and whatever, but then they were like, nah, we've got to trade him, and it affected their team a little bit. But, from a coaching standpoint, I think Noel Williams will be good. I think it was obviously a position of need for them. I'm going to give this an A grade as well. Jalen Royals, I really, really like this pick for him, out of Utah State, a guy who's just a solid height, and was quick from side to side. I think that they're going to be able to do some things with him that were like a little Tyreek-esque. Obviously, Royals isn't as fast as Tyreek, but you can get a lot of separation and get space by faking out your opponents with, this top of the line, sideline to sideline speed. So it's like, I like the pick. I know they're going to make good use of him. Jalen Royals, Rashee Rice, and, and then you look at Pacheco, if he returns to form, I think this is a team that could definitely, use a guy like Royals who has good size and everything. So I like it. I'm going to give it an A grade. Jeffrey Bassa, the guy who I was like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if it was Bosa right here? We have a third Bosa brother, but obviously that's not the case. Linebacker, lighter. But I think that, they, like I said, Spags is a very good job of coaching. I think that, he made Nick Bolden better than what Nick Bolden was supposed to be. Nick Bolden was supposed to be a very solid coverage guy, nothing flashy, sure tackler, but he's developed into one of the better linebackers in the league. And the contract they gave him, represents that. I think that Bassa is going to come in, and he's going to be a kind of speedy sideline to sideline dude. And I think that, it's a very overall good pick. I'm giving it a B+, just because it wasn't their biggest need. Brashard Smith, a running back. I don't think it's a bad idea, given that, Isaiah Pacheco was kind of, banged up and obviously didn't return to form. So they have Pacheco, they have, Hunt, right, as their second, who they kept onto the team, and then they bring in Brashard Smith, who clearly to me looks like he's going to have a role. A guy who, it's like Samaje Perine was kind of the check down guy and the smart guy that they would give the ball to, in the short yardage situations and as the security blanket. Brashard Smith, being a pro comp of Tony Pollard, to me looks like he can be a dude who can make people miss in space, good speed, quick, and, be able to be a receiving threat and make an impact on this offense. Who, teams are going to be like, oh, the Chiefs did it again with a late net round running back pick, and they just, use them to convert first down after first down. I'm giving this an A grade, because I definitely think that, with, like I said, with Isaiah Pacheco, uncertain, because they want to see him return to form before, and they said this, before even extending him, I think it was smart that they added a running back to fit a need, right now. So overall for the Chiefs, I really, really like their draft. The only kind of pick that I had a little bit of qualms on was Bassa, really, but overall very solid draft. I am going to give it an A, though, just because I think that, the Chiefs don't really make mistakes in the draft. And that it's like, this is one of those teams that it's like they really only get derailed through injuries, like a lot of teams, obviously. But tell me what you guys think about this video. Tell me what you thought about these teams' drafts. I think that overall it was very solid drafts all around for the AFC West. So, this division will look very fun, I think, next year. But it wouldn't surprise me if Kansas City wins it. I think that people think that Kansas City is kind of potentially, going to be on the down and out next year. I just don't think that it's that easy. Especially when they have Reed, Mahomes, and Spags, and then, Chris Jones, McDuffie, Bolton, Leo Chenal, and just like, an overall very solid cast of players, that they maximize their efficiency with. But yeah, tell me what you think, and like the video, leave a comment. But as always, go Pack, go.